Okay, everyone, our last lecture in week 7 is going to focus on the care of prisoners in the 20th century. What kind of changes occurred over 100 years since Auburn and Pennsylvania Eastern prisons were built? The summary is taken from Scott Christensen's With Liberty for Some 500 Years of Imprisonment in America in Northeastern University Press, 1998. Okay, maximum security prison intended as an institution of total control, even as other institutions, asylums, changed indoor relief. Altered structure, added massive walls, reinforced steel bars, elaborate locking systems, canisters of tear gas, multi-tiered cell blocks, so few guards could inspect hundreds of prisoners. In 1933, 4,300 penal institutions in the U.S., 1,500 municipal jails, workhouses, farms, stockades for misdemeanors, 2,500 county jails, workhouse, farms, chain gangs for convicted misdemeanants, and 109 state prisons for convicted felons in 48 states, 16 state reformatories convicted youthful offenders, 3 federal prisons under military control, 150 additional juvenile reformatories, 233,631 inmates. Auburn and Pennsylvania Eastern Penitentiary were still in operation with little change. In fact, that included still in lockstep. Constitutional rights ended at the gate. The crime didn't matter. No free exercise of religion or freedom of speech. No right to assemble peacefully. Could not petition the government to redress grievances. Could be penalized without the due process of law, lacked the right of a speedy trial, did not have the right to be free of cruel and unusual punishment, could not vote, gradually shift into out of sight, out of mind. 1940s court cases began to address prisoners' constitutional right, slow to change. Prisoners' rights movement in the 1950s and 60s grew out of the civil rights movement. It was influenced by a disproportionate number of African Americans, Hispanic, and Native American prisoners. Individuals participating in protests and civil disobediences were sent to jail, and the groups learned about each other. They found support in the Supreme Court that ruled in favor of their constitutional rights. Prisoners could sue for constitutional rights, due process right to an attorney, and Miranda rights. Injunction against cruel and unusual punishment of solitary confinement, 1965, 150 years after Auburn and the Pennsylvania Eastern State Penitentiary. Arkansas in 1966, there were really despicable conditions. The ratio of staff to inmates was 1 to 65, whereas the national average was 1 to 7, just to give you an idea of the disparity there. Labor 10 to 14-hour days, 6 days a week, with no compensation, training, or rehabilitation. It is the only state where convict whipping was still legal and used on a regular basis. The governor's race, the governor challenged about the systematic brutality and corruption and called for an investigation. A new governor followed up with the investigation. Outsider Tim Merton was brought in to manage the prison farm. He was an ex-Marine and a PhD candidate. 2,000 inmates on a 4,500-acre prison managed by 34 staff. Armed inmates were kept in order. Abolished flogging and torture. Needed to rely on trustees, the highest level of armed inmates. Planned a 2-year transition without informing trustees of final goal of professional staff. Ended exploitation of inmate labor. It opposed state making profits by overworking the inmates. It established a school, grades 1 through 9. It moved death row prisoners out of isolation. Converted the death house into a hospital. opened a non-profit blood bank. Local physicians had earned $130,000 to $150,000 per year, selling inmates' blood at $1 million in 2013. Employees promoted on merit, not purchasing positions, met with opposition, local politicians who lost control and money, and politicians who not like their state being put in a bad light. Politicians opposed an increase in spending on prisons. And he actually was eventually dismissed because of making reports public before he spoke to the government and the governor's office in particular. In the U.S., there were riots in the 1950s to the 1990s. The American penal system had broken down, was a statement by one political reporter. Angelo, Louisiana, Trenton, New Jersey, Jackson, Michigan, Attica, New York, Santa Fe, New Mexico, overcrowding and brutal treatment along with poor medical care. The corrections, American Prison Association changed to American Corrections Association. Urged changing name of prisons to correctional institutions. Recognized that rehabilitation in 19th century prisons was not very effective. Attica resulted in costly changes, security, emergency control, and public relations, program services, and inmate discipline. And Attica is probably one of the most famous, and I know that for some of you who are doing prison reform, this is definitely something you're going to want to focus on in your final paper. And I just want to note on my reference page that there are some really great primary resources out there for Attica, including recordings of both inmates and guards who discuss what it was like to be a part of that incident in New York. So clearly this lecture is very focused on prison reform, and you're going to want to check out this reference slide if that's your topic for the final paper. Thanks, you guys. You have a great week.